So, okay. So, hi everyone. Good to see you all. Today we actually have a very interesting webinar and session. We are very happy to host today Ether Burit, who is actually the founder of Skills Master Market. And she is also a well-known podcaster and speaker in the L&D field. And her expertise, besides leadership development, is all about creating behavioral change. And one of the reason when I started myQuest, so some of you are familiar with myQuest, some of you are not. myQuest is basically a training platform in LMS. But really, the reason why I started the company from the first place is I saw that there is a big gap between just providing people with access to information than actually create behavioral change and develop new skills. Because information alone is not enough to really create behavioral change. And at myQuest, we put a lot of focus on different features and capability that you can have in the LMS to create these kinds of behavioral change. And we can talk about a little bit about it later. But what's really interesting today in this session is that Ether is going to really go deep into what do we need to do in order to create behavioral change. When we build training, what do we need to think about? And I think she's going to bring really interesting insights, and this session is going to be very interesting. So without any further ado, Heather, feel free to kick off this webinar, and yeah, let's get started.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to jump in and talk more about behavior change today. So, I actually want to start with a question. Have you ever tried to change a behavior or create a new habit? You personally. Think about a New Year's resolution, maybe, a time that you wanted to create a new behavior or habit. And think about that and think about what happened. Were you successful? Give me a yes or no in the chat box. Were you successful? Yes, I see some yeses. I see some temporary success. It took time. Yes. Yeah. Think about what made it successful. We know that a lot of New Year's resolutions are broken, a lot of organizational change fails. And so there's something that makes it successful. And that's what we want to talk about today. So I want to start with a story. I went to my primary care physician last year and they did some blood work, as they do. And the doctor called me after the appointment to say everything looked good. So I didn't take any action. I didn't do anything different because I wasn't aware there was any kind of a problem. Later in the year, I saw a specialist about something else, and they pulled up my recent blood work and pointed out that my iron levels were actually a little low. So they suggested I start to take iron at least every other day. So here's what I did. I bought some iron, but I only took it when I remembered, and I wasn't super regular about it. I didn't have a sense of urgency motivating me to do it. Then later in the year, I saw a different specialist about something else, and they too pulled up my blood work from earlier that year. But this doctor, she paused. You know that pause. You don't want that pause at the doctor's office. She paused, and she told me that my iron levels were so low that if I didn't get them up, she would want to start me on an IV to give me iron. Well, that's a completely different picture. And do you know what I did? I started taking my iron. But it wasn't until someone made me aware of the problem, gave me instructions on how to fix it, and really made me uncomfortable thinking about the alternative that I decided to change my behavior. And even then, I had to set an alarm on my phone to remind me to do it. Behavior change is a funny thing. Taking iron is a simple task, yet I needed awareness, a sense of urgency, and a prompt to do it. So why are we surprised when our learners don't change? Even a simple change can feel pretty complex. And so we have to intentionally design for behavior change at every step in the process. And that's what we're going to explore today. Here's the challenge. Knowledge doesn't equal behavior change. Yet most of our training focuses on what people need to know and maybe do if we're lucky. They don't actually account for the behavior change. I'm Heather, and I'm an L&D pro. I've been in the field for about 20 years. I worked internally at a national nonprofit for about 8 years, and now I consult some of the largest nonprofits in the US on their training and leadership development needs. And I know what it's like to be asked to create a training because someone thinks the learner needs to know something. And I'm on a mission to fix that. I'm also a host of Learning for Good, top 2.5% globally ranked podcast. And I formed a private community for nonprofit and association L&D pros where I bring them together so that we can learn and grow together. I'm also a contributor to many industry organizations such as Chief Learning Officer and Training Industry Inc. And I say all that to say, I've been at this for a while and I'm on a quest to always do it better because the people we serve deserve it. So I want you to think about your audience, one audience that you serve with training. And as we head into this talk, I want you to have a specific change in mind. So think about that audience and what is one change you need that audience to make. I hope you have something in mind. If you don't mind and you're able to, share that change in the chat box. One change you need a key audience to make. All right, I see excitement for learning and growth, greater participation in virtual training. Hold on to that change. I recognize not everybody can share the specifics of the change in the chat box. Hold on to that change. If you're able to share it, add it there. But we're going to come back to this change throughout our webinar today. How will you help your key audience make this change? Historically, our answer has been training. In fact, the Harvard Business Review found that companies spend $350 billion on training every single year. And here's what typically happens. See if this sounds familiar to you. Someone thinks we have a problem, but they say we need a training. And so they schedule a meeting with the learning leader, who schedules a meeting with the L&D manager, who schedules a meeting with the instructional designer, who reaches out to the subject matter expert. And it's like playing a game of telephone when the gossip wasn't accurate in the first place. And training doesn't always work. Traditional training focuses on knowledge, not behavior, and it crams too much information into one solution. It isn't based on behavior change principles, and it doesn't account for external factors like supervisor buy-in and existing systems and processes. It isn't personalized for the learner, and quite frankly, it often just doesn't work. So why do we always go with training? As the famous rapper Cheryl James said, change is not an event, it is a process, and training is an event. So I want us to shift from training to a human-centered process. And that's what we'll explore today. Now, how do we drive change? We want to make sure we are reflecting on the past so we know what worked and what didn't work. We want to make sure we're casting a vision for the future. And we want to identify a specific behavior to change. It has to be specific, has to be small. Determine that gap. What are they doing now versus what do you need them to do in the future? Support development of that new behavior. We always have to be thinking about measuring success. And then we want to create some future check-ins to adapt and sustain the change. Let's talk about how we do that. So we're going to cover the 3 C's framework. And this is how we drive change: context, the change itself, and community. So, context. We want to avoid the telephone game. So instead, we want to get firsthand information and experiences from the intended audience. This provides us with the context we need to inform how we design for behavior change. And there's 2 components to gathering this context. The first is what is happening inside the organization, or even outside the organization, that's driving the need for behavior change. Let me give you an example. So I was working with a client who had tons of staff changes happening. One team at this organization in particular had new leadership every 6 to 12 months. And when I spoke with their executive, she said that she was actually the 4th leader they had had in just a few years. Now, her goal was to create a team that worked together toward collective impact, which is basically transformational partnerships creating change in a community. They had traditionally worked with external partners on a very transactional level. And to achieve their organization's strategic goals, they needed deeper partnerships in the community where they worked. And so the organization's strategies in this case were driving this change that she wanted to create. The other piece of context is learning about the learner themselves. So what is the day-to-day experience of the learner that might motivate them or discourage them from making that change? So for this client in particular, the amount of leadership turnover had impacted morale. Staff did not feel seen, they did not feel heard, and they did not feel valued. And they kind of were thinking, why should we put a ton of effort into one executive's vision when history told them that they were just going to get a new executive in a few short months? So, and on top of that, this team also had enrollment quotas to meet. They were responsible for enrolling people in the program they needed the partnerships for. And so on top of creating these partnerships, they were busy doing other aspects of their job. So there were real and perceived barriers to this change, and we had to uncover those because it's part of the context. And if you had asked them, this learner, why they weren't creating deeper partnerships, they would have told you, I'm busy working, right? But we don't know these things. We don't know their context unless we empathize with them and we ask them. So I want you to go back again to the key audience that you're thinking about and the change you need them to make. And I want you to spend a little bit of time empathizing with them, okay? Put yourself in their shoes. Think about their daily experience at work. What are the tasks that they're doing? What keeps them busy? What keeps them up at night? What might motivate them to make the change you have in mind? And what might prevent them from making that change? Now, at this point, whatever you come up with is just a guess. But these are the things you can discover when you spend time with your audience. That's what gives you the context you need. I'm seeing some of your responses in chat. Yes, feel free, please put those in if you're able to share what might motivate them to make that change and what might prevent them from making that change. Audrey, I see peer pressure, and that's so accurate and so funny because it can actually motivate them or prevent them depending on how you look at it. So they might get some positive feedback and that might motivate them to make a change, or they might get negative feedback, or they might have fear of failure. They might want to be fair as a leader. Yes, David. There might also be some things holding them back. Maybe they don't have a clear understanding of the big picture. Exactly, Samantha. The context, what's happening inside the organization or even outside that's driving that change, and the context of their environment, their work, their lives. Those things are what help us frame the right design. So if I think back to how do we drive change, the context really helps us with the first 3 to 4 steps. We're using context to help us think through the past, to help us create a vision for that future, and to start to identify the behavior that needs to change. But let's talk about the change itself. It's the second C, and it's going to help us with those next few steps. All right, the second C is change. Now, I said at the beginning, knowledge doesn't equal behavior change. So what does? How do we do this? Let's ask the experts. So one popular change model that you may have heard of is the ADKAR model. Are people aware? That's the A. Are they aware they need to change? Do they have the desire? That's the D. Do they have the desire to change? Do they know how to change? That's the K. Do they have the ability to change? That's the A. And how will the change be reinforced over time? That's the R. That is a really popular model used in organizations. And I also really like some of the individual behavior change experts that talk about how to create this transformation. So I also want to take a look at The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. He talks about the habit loop. There's a cue, there's a routine, there's a reward. Something instigates the change, it becomes implemented, you see some sort of reward, right? Something has to trigger that change, then you can implement it, then you can receive the reward. James Clear has a similar model, but his process also includes craving as part of the process. And he changes routine to response. So you get that cue, something triggers you to change, but then you also have to want it. You have to have that craving to change. Then you can respond and implement the change. And then with that, you can be rewarded. And when implementing the change, BJ Fogg in the book Tiny Habits talks about the importance of starting small. So find a place in your existing routine to try something new. What does this look like? How do we bring this to life? So going back to my iron example, my cue was my blood work and my meeting with the doctors who pointed out that my iron levels were low. But my craving, my desire to make that change didn't come until I found a sense of urgency from the last doctor that I saw. And it didn't come until the minute she mentioned hooking me up to an IV because I do not like needles. My response was to start taking iron, and then I tried to stack that into my routine by taking it right after dinner. I eat dinner every day, I take my iron every day. Except I still wasn't successful. It was that prompt that got me there. I set an alarm on my phone, and that's how I remembered to take my iron. So when we think about how do we embed this into our human-centered process that probably includes some training, I like to say we need to give them abs. We're building their behavior change muscle. Awareness. I knew I needed to make the change. Buy-in. I was motivated to make the change. Skills. I knew how to make the change. And then social support and prompts. I had accountability for that change.
One thing I wanna add,
Mhm.
like if some of you guys, as part of your training, you're focusing on creating habits, I would highly recommend you to. I read two of the books that Ethel mentioned in this slide, The Power of Habit and Atomic Habits, but it's really important to understand these frameworks when you're trying to create habits. And we also implemented habits formation tool at myQuest, but also when you're beyond the LMS itself, when you're designing and thinking about the habit, you really want to try to think on what will be the trigger for the habit. And this can be, by the way, the LMS, but then what's the action, what's the reward? Like you really want to try and in a way design these habits, because if you're gonna design these habits in a thoughtful way, you'll see incredible results. And many times when uh, trainers are doing training in organization, first many times they don't even think about implementing habits. And if you want to create behavioral change, habits is very important component inside of it, because eventually to change behavior, either you need to create a one-time event that really moves people so much, it's like, I wouldn't say life-changing event, but sometimes things like that happen, right? That this really amazed me so much, but it's very difficult to create such strong emotion for people. So the other option is to really design your habits and what you want people to do on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And this is a very powerful tool to create long last, change and real impact in the organization.
Absolutely. I put the books back on the screen. These are great if you have not read these yet. Great resources. And really, comes down to intentionality. At the end of the day, we have to be really intentional in how we design training. So, how do we do it? We're talking about awareness, buy-in, skills, social support, and prompts. So we want to build awareness and gain buy-in for the change. And I know you're probably thinking, we're L&D experts, not behavior change experts. How do we actually do this? What does it look like? We're still creating training at the end of the day. So let me share an example. I want to go back to my client who wanted to create deeper relationships with their partners for collective impact. So I designed a learning experience, not a one-time event. So it was not one training. The experience lasted 7 months. They attended 2 live virtual sessions with an outside facilitator. They completed 2 e-learning modules on collective impact, and they received weekly emails with prompts and resources. They were also matched with a peer who was more tenured, more experienced in community partnerships. And then they were given a few months to implement. Then they came back for a final session in month 7. The sessions were designed not to lecture them about partnerships and collective impact, but to allow them to reflect on their experiences as an individual and as a team. So some of the first conversations they had in that first live virtual session: what have you done in the past? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What would you want to be different in the future? They were able to reflect and share with each other, and they started to gain some buy-in to the fact that some sort of change needed to happen, because they weren't told, you have to change. They were able to reflect on their own experiences, share with each other, and through that process discover that a change needed to happen. And it wasn't about this leader who came in who, again, history told them might leave within a few months. It wasn't about the leader, it was about them and the vision they wanted for their team. And this is important because people don't like change when it's done to them, but they don't mind it as much when it's done by them. And I bet if we go back to those original changes that you made personally in the beginning, when you were talking about reading and exercise and things like that, a lot of those changes were probably intrinsically motivated. You decided that you wanted to make that change. But often in an organization, we're saying you need to make this change. And so using that reflection and that sharing and that discovery process creates that buy-in for the change itself. Now, we also have to build skills to support the change, and this is where L&D thrives. For this particular client, we introduced new concepts in the e-learning and discussed them in the live sessions and in their peer groups. We also provided case studies in the emails that were being sent, which again, they were able to discuss in their peer groups. And we gave them time to implement before coming to that final session. So there was actually a break in the sessions where they were really just implementing on the job. And it became a really intentional time for them to practice. They still had their peer groups that they could call on if they needed to, but it was outside the context of training. And so this time that they had together and this time that we spent really building those skills provided clarity on what they were supposed to be doing and how to do it. And we did that, like I said, it was multiple methods that we used to reach them with skill building across that span of 7 months. But we also need to sustain the change. We need social support and prompts. So those weekly emails that we sent were a constant reminder of the work they needed to do, but they also supported them in doing that work. So it wasn't just an email saying, don't forget to do this, don't forget your next live virtual session, don't forget to complete your e-learning, but it was actual resources, social support, and prompts that were being delivered to their inbox. And then those relationships that we were able to build both in the live virtual sessions and in their peer groups that they were able to meet with, those lasted outside of the training. They go with them back into the workplace. So when we take the time to build that social support, even in the context of training, they get to take that with them. Those relationships outlive any event. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I can also share from my experience with myQuest that this is also very powerful. One of the think about any new habit that you try to implement in your life, which wasn't easy, right? And at the beginning, like we have lots of motivation and sometimes we have some drawbacks. And then if we are alone at this, you need to have a very strong, I would say, discipline to keep going and not to quit it in the middle. But if you have, whether you're doing it as part of a group, or maybe you have accountability partner or a mentor, someone who actually sees you in this process, this dramatically change, the chances for success. This was also our inspiration when we added the capabilities of mentoring or community or even accountability partner as part of the training. Because if you will look at traditional LMSs, you'll see that most of the time you just get access to the content, but then you're isolated. But when I've built our training platform, I knew, like I came from it from the perspective of how can I create behavioral change for someone? And the social aspect is crucial. So whether you use myQuest or if you're not using myQuest, you can still do it, but try to think how can you create this social connection outside of the LMS, and how can you connect people together? How can you let people work in a group and share their experiences with a group? Because this will really set you up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And those relationships, they can be built synchronous or asynchronous, right? So you can leverage the time you have together in some sort of live training, whether it's virtual or in person, but you can also leverage time outside of that training. And Adon, you all have done a great job inside of myQuest of building some of that in, like you're saying. So there are great opportunities to build these relationships and social support have been proven to support behavior change. So, and it's something we don't always think about in L&D. We think about getting them the skills, we think about getting them the practice, we think about what they need to know. We don't always think about the relationships because it's not always, and I don't know that it should be, right? But it's not always the objective of the course. But it is a part of achieving whatever that objective is. So it's important to build those in whenever we can. And here's the results from the client project that I've been sharing. Participants said they finally felt heard. Now, remember, one of the things I said in the beginning is they'd had all this organizational change, all this leadership turnover. They didn't feel seen. They didn't feel heard. They didn't feel valued. And they weren't bought into a change that a new executive was bringing to them because they felt like that was just going to change again too. But going through this process, allowing them to reflect and share and discover before we ever start building skills, and building those relationships throughout the process, building that social support throughout the process, they finally felt heard. They felt like they were part of it. And you know what happens when you build those relationships and create that trusting environment? People have the social support they need to make that change. Again, those relationships go back into the workplace. So this is essential to behavior change. So I want you to think about the change you are trying to create with a key audience that you're working with. How can you go beyond training? How can you make that shift from training to a human-centered approach, a human-centered solution? I've shared several ideas along the way. Adana shared some of the ways that myQuest works as well. I want you to just take a minute and think maybe one thing that you can do that goes beyond your traditional training. And if you have ideas, feel free to share those in the chat box. Take the time now to reflect before we move into the final C. Ask people what they want or need. Use journey groups. Are those like cohorts, David? Like they're going through the experience together? Oh, I think we're all muted. I don't know if you're able to unmute or if you want to type in chat.
Oh, yeah, I think I can. Yeah. Okay. Hi. Yeah, it's, if you have a large group that is going through a developmental process over a number of months, like a leadership program or something, for example, we had 4 moments when we all came together, but between those moments, apart from other things being done, they met up in smaller groups, maybe of 4 or 5, and they had that group consistently through the process. And there was no formal agenda for it, but it was a self-directed group that allowed people to then reflect on, the topic maybe in the previous workshop that we'd had, how they'd applied things. And yeah, it was kind of, they became accountability buddies as well in the process. And apparently, the easiest thing to do if you want to have your, if you have some kind of action plan that you want to put into practice, then sharing that with your peers is going to increase the probability that you're actually going to do something about it, because, you've put yourself out there, you've made a promise not just to yourself, which you could kid yourself about by not doing it, but you can then, you have a slightly more bigger obligation over a period of months to actually do what you said you were going to do and try it out and experiment with it. Yeah. So that's the idea.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I love that. And that's a great, if you all are not designing groups that work outside of the synchronous environment, that's a great approach. With this particular client, we did peer groups, so we did partners basically. I've also done more like pod groups, like I think what you're describing, David, where it's maybe 3 or 4 people in a group, and they're meeting and doing things in between the sessions. It is a great way to build relationships in a smaller setting, a smaller group setting, and build in that accountability and give them time to reflect on what's working and what's not working as well. And Liz, I see you're using cohorts as well. It's great. But Don, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I
Oh,
wanted to ask David
Oh.
one quick question. Are you using the myQuest communities and cohorts for these groups, or is it separate from the LMS?
Oh, that was my question. Was
Yeah, we
actually
didn't.
in the middle of typing this for Don as well. Can you answer how myQuest can support these pods or cohorts? And I'm super interested to know how the other gentleman was using it, because right now we're doing it all via, manual. I'm typing as I'm doing these cohorts and facilitating them and keeping track and keeping diligent notes. But I'd love to know what others are doing. So I'm going to erase my note.
For this particular project that we were doing, we didn't have the budget to have myQuest used for all of them, but we do have a future project where we probably would be using myQuest for supporting these kind of journey groups that we call them. But I'd be interested to ask Aidan, for example, I know we have a community area where you can sometimes stoke it, and sometimes you have key people that keep it moving and share stuff on it. But sometimes when you have a large group, like 40, 50 people going through the same process together, it's a bit intimidating. And you always think somebody else is going to do something and I'll wait until somebody else. And then everyone's waiting for everyone else. So, the challenge really is, are there features within myQuest that allow smaller groups within a larger cohort to kind of break off and have an informal community together?
Yeah, so maybe I'll show real quick because not everyone are familiar with myQuest, I know you do, and then I can answer your question. I'll share my screen real quick. Billy, can you let me share my screen? So this is how a program looks like in myQuest. It looks a little bit different than the traditional LMS. Again, the focus here is on behavioral change and really take it through a process. So you see the learners, they can have different missions and activities, and in each mission they might have image, videos, documents, and they either need to go and do something, or they might have some reflection questions they need to answer. Now, we focus a lot on the accountability part. So each learner either can have a coach or accountability partner that supports the learner, but also a community of learner. And following David's question, you can also create cohorts in the training. So for example, let's say I have a cohort of 40 people, I can have this cohort work together, and then they can see what they're doing, right? Now, David, to your question, what happens if the cohort is not like 10 people, but maybe 40 people, 100 people? How do you encourage people to share their progress, right? This was your question in the cohort.
Exactly. Yeah.
So couple of things. One thing that you can do, let me actually make progress real quick in this program. I want to show you something. I'll go back after this. We also have habit formation tool that maybe I'll show it to you later, that really helps people to create habits in the program. But one of the best tactics, let me just skip through some of the missions here. I want to go to mission 6. So one of the things that you can do is, after someone complete a mission, you can ask a follow-up question. Now, this is very important because usually people don't just go to the community and share something. Very small amount of the people will do it, but you really want to create the sharing as an integral part of the training itself. So Heather before talked about reflection, how it's important for creating behavioral change. In myQuest, after someone completes a specific activity, you can design a specific question that you want to ask the learner about the activity they just did. So if you use this question and write it in a very specific way that encourage people to share it with the community, you see, I can post it now with my coach or mentor, or maybe to my journal if I don't have a coach, but I can also post it to the community. And from what we are seeing, around 20% of the people will click post on community. If you'll ask this question very connected to the training and really explain why it's important to share it with others, 20% will share it with the community. And then when I'll go back to the community, I'll see these kinds of answers from other people, right? They will see the question, and then I can see the question that they've been answering as part of their program. And then people start seeing what other people write, and you start creating a sense of a community, even if it's still a little bit larger group. So this is one tactic that you can use. Another tactic that you can use, many times we create a mission where maybe it's this mission. I don't think I have a mission like this here, but really in the mission itself, we tell people, please go to the community tab and share something with the team. Like, make sure it's something that they'll feel comfortable to share, but you really want to connect the community and the group to be part of the training. And if you're doing it in a smart way, you'll start having a very active community. One more tip that I can give you, that we've been working with the largest healthcare provider here in Israel, and what they use the one-on-one coaching feature. So each one of it was a very professional training in the healthcare space. So each one of the physicians really worked with a mentor, and the mentor helped them to learn some new skills. And any kind of insights that they had in their personal conversation, the mentor would have gone with the permission of the learner and share it with the community. So, and then the community became a place where people could learn from other people's experiences, even if it was through the mentor. So these are a few tactics that you can use to really make sure that you can create very vibrant community, and there's lots of potential in the community. And you can also build small cohorts with myQuest, and when doing it correctly and really make sure people have a connection with other learner, that you see a very big change in the training. Now, one last thing I can add is, it's not always possible, but if people know each other from real life, and they have and they know who else with them in the community, it's actually might be a real advantage, because some of the people, if it's a group which is, there is a trust between the people, and maybe you can work on that trust at the beginning of the training, and maybe have like in-person meeting with everyone and then go to the self-paced training. It really encourages people also to share some stuff in the community.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would agree that building that trust is important if you want them to share in the community. I'm going to skip my funny Netflix joke and go directly to community, because that is where I think we are. If there's time, I can share my Netflix joke. So to all of your points, behavior change doesn't happen in a silo. And neither does learning. And so the final C of the 3 C's is community. And I'm not going to spend as much time on community today, just because I wanted to make sure we went through those aspects of behavior change and really spend time there. But it is essential to change. Community is essential to change. And so I want to make sure we at least start thinking about it. So this is a picture of me at 8 months pregnant. After doing one of the hardest CrossFit workouts there is. It's called Mirth. And I want to just kind of pause, like, why did I do CrossFit my entire pregnancy, and why on earth would I have chosen to do a 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another 1 mile run while 8 months pregnant? And if you're wondering, yes, I scaled it. I did not do the whole thing on my own, but I did it because of the community. Nothing compares to the feeling you get when you do something hard with people who care about you. And if I didn't show up, my phone would have been lit up from all the texts. That's community. That's what helps us change, and that's what holds us accountable. So wherever we can create community, whether it is through those synchronous meetings, whether it's through the online community space that we have to offer, whether it's through the smaller groups that meet in between sessions, whatever it is, whatever way we can create community, that is a huge part of behavior change and of learning. So I do want us to think about how we build community for our learners as well. Now, you saw some ways to do that in myQuest. You've heard some other ideas that I've shared, that David has shared in the chat and off of mute. But if you think about that change that you want to create, what are some ways you can build community for your learners? Take a minute. Think of one or two ideas, one or two ways you can build community. Now, when you use these 3 C's, you're basically creating a playbook for your L&D team. And you're able to offer the play-by-play, right, for your learners. Because you want them at the end of the day to get out on the field. You want them to get into their jobs and their roles as a leader, as an individual contributor, whatever it is. And you want them to win. You want them to perform high. You want them to achieve your mission. You want them to move your organizational strategies forward, right? You want them to win. And so having this playbook is what helps get you there. And when you do this, when you focus on these 3 C's, there's no limit to the impact that you can have. You are doing important work. I want to say that again. You are doing important work. You are a strategic partner to others inside of your organization. You're helping people navigate change and show up as their best selves every single day. You're building the future leaders of your organization. You're amplifying the work of your people. You're accelerating impact, and you're making a difference. Now, a couple years ago, I created a learning experience for a client. We knew that the postpartum death rates in the US were too high. And this organization had committed to bringing those numbers down. And so they saw doulas and midwives as the conduit for this. And so we set out to create a behavior change for those doulas and midwives that they were training. We needed the doulas and midwives to create great relationships with their clients, the pregnant person, right? The postpartum person. Because we needed them to recognize urgent warning signs that the postpartum women were experiencing, and we needed them to leverage that relationship that they had built to encourage their clients to seek medical care. So we designed an experience to help create this change. And a few months after we launched this new learning experience, we heard from one of those learners, and she had done it. She had recognized something that was going on with one of her clients, and she got this person to seek medical care. And she was right. She probably saved that person's life. All because we were intentional about how we designed that learning experience. That is the impact that L&D can have. What we're doing is important. So think about that behavior change you want to create. What's one thing that you can take away from our time together today and apply to that project? There's no way you can take everything in a 1-hour webinar. I know that. That's not the way behavior change works, right? I know you can't take everything away. What's one thing you can? What's one thing you can apply to your project? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Now, I recognize that just like your learners, this might be a change for you. It could be a shift in how you approach L&D. And as we've talked about today, behavior change is complex. And so I encourage you to find a thought partner who can help you brainstorm, problem solve, and hold you accountable to the impact you want to create, because it's important. And we know knowledge doesn't equal behavior change. So if all else fails, set a reminder on your phone, get that prompt, and move forward. Madonna, I want to turn it over to you and see if there's anything else you want to share in myQuest.
No, I think I already shared. Let's open, love people, if you wanna. Actually, I didn't talk about the habit formation tool. So just for like 1 minute, I want to show you one of the things that, and then we can have Q&A, but one of the things that we have, myQuest, we talked a little bit about habits, is when you complete specific missions, you can unlock them as a habit. You see, for example, here I have a habit as a manager to do a daily meeting with my team. And the system will remind the learner to do their habits, and then I can do the habits and get points. Right now, we are also working on the next, I would say, generation of the system. And in this generation, we also want to be able allow the learners to put in their habits and not just have daily habits, but maybe weekly habits. So we really want to take the entire habit concept to the next level, because we really believe that, training and learning should go beyond just providing people with access to information. We really believe it's all about creating behavioral change. It's all about making impact on the organization. Yeah, anyone has any question that you want to share with Heather or with me, anything, let us know if anything we can, maybe question about, behavioral change and anything that Heather was speaking about.
Well, I'll throw a stone in the water here, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Which is one of the challenges. I mean, training is limited in the sense, if you have a very large organization, one of the challenges, let's say you have 5,000 people. Sometimes, people think, well, you need to kind of flood the organization with training workshops, and they kind of think that success is, last year we did 300 workshops. I mean, so what? I completely agree with the behavioral change. Nothing changes unless people's behavior changes. It's a pretty fundamental thing. So, I was thinking, you've been talking about a fairly small scale training with a group. And if you have 5,000 people in your organization where you want behavioral change to occur, for example, you want to support a culture change around the values, which may be a bit kind of fuzzy, and the usual thing, we need to be transparent and have trust and, basically be good people, and it's all a bit fuzzy. How would you approach the scaling up of the process, where obviously training is a bit limited because it's a process of a multiplication of training. You just do more training, and budgets are limited. So what would you suggest to scale up the process of behavioral change from your experience?
Yeah. So I will start by saying there's probably not one right answer. And so if other people have ideas, feel free to jump in and share what you would do as well. The example I gave was a team, you're right. I do often work with larger federated nonprofits where they are looking at training thousands of people across time to achieve scale. One of the things that I'm doing with a client now is working on a leadership development program that will, I think they have a goal of 2,000-ish, 2,000 leaders trained within the next 2 years. And so they are having to put quite a large number of people through the process to achieve the behavior change that they're looking to achieve. Again, I think it comes down to just how we're designing that experience, because it's easy to check the box and say, well, they attended a 1-hour workshop, so surely they have it and they know what the new values are and they can move forward with that. What we chose to do in this particular case is we actually created a very robust leadership development program. It's a 2-year program. And so people are nominated to attend. Their supervisor has to, or someone else in the organization has to sponsor their attendance. So if somebody's saying we believe in this person and they should do this, we'll support them in the process. And then they have a very blended experience that we created for them. And so some of that might not apply if you're talking about values and you need to get to everybody, then you may not have the nomination and that kind of thing. But the blended experience, I think, is where there are similarities. So we do have live virtual sessions. To reach that number of people, it's often hard to do that in person. So we do have live virtual sessions. And we have assignments in between sessions that are hands-on. They will complete a project throughout that 2-year time frame. So they're learning and doing things throughout that process to build on that project. We do have them divided into smaller groups outside of those live sessions. So they're ramping up now. I think there's going to be about 50 people per session or per cohort. So they'll have smaller groups of like 4 or 5 people that they're meeting with in between, and they're working on things within between those sessions. So those things all exist. And we also incorporated a kind of a reflection journal. And so if you think about some of the things that Adon shared, there's opportunities there as well. So I think there's lots of ways to scale things, and it really kind of depends on what it is that you need them to be able to do. What is the behavior that you need to change? If you're able to break that behavior down into something really tiny, going back to BJ Fogg's advice, that's really helpful too. But I think, there's lots of ways to design and get there, but really looking at what are we doing outside of those sessions and building those relationships as well, especially culture change, man. That's hard.
Yeah. David, if you want, I don't know if you want to deliver it through myQuest or not, but I'll be happy to book a separate meeting and do some brainstorming together with you and see how some of our capabilities can help you do scale, especially now with some of the new AI capabilities that we added.
No, absolutely.
So
I mean, that's mainly what I do. I mean, I'm a large-scale behavioral change person who started off as a trainer, but got fed up with the lack of scalability of training and thought, how can we do this differently? And perhaps how can we use other disciplines like political campaigning, like Kamala Harris, for example, gets together thousands of people. She doesn't train them all, but you build, a community of support, and you have people knocking on doors who are of the same type as the person that you're knocking on the door of. You don't have pensioners ringing up students telling them why it's a good thing to vote for party A or party B. You get people like me who engage with people like me. So because they're going to be more influential there. So I think it's kind of interesting to think, your community, to take it even further, is how can we use the informal organization also, which we often don't think of as trainers. We're formally given people at certain ranks in the organization or certain target groups, but how can we use the informal organization to develop a process of behavioral change? But yeah, that's a story for another couple of beers later on.
Yeah, David, one of the things I'm proposing for a project next year is almost like a pyramid. And I wonder if that's something that you might explore as well. Because it's a very hands-on change. They're going to need a lot of hands-on support to make the change in this particular project. So I'm proposing that we start with a few people who know what that change is, get a few people trained up in that, get them that experience, but also what to do, how to guide someone basically. So not necessarily becoming a trainer.
It's a kind of cascading process.
And then cascading it that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think Bradley has a question.
Yeah, Bradley.
Sorry.
There we go. Yeah, I just wanted to add in a couple of things that behavior change doesn't happen on its own. That I'm a big believer in there's a hierarchy, and behavior change sits kind of in the middle, and above it are values and beliefs, and then identity. And I think the design of learning to generate behavior change needs to step up into that beliefs and values. and
Absolutely.
ultimately into identity, because
Yeah.
behavior is driven at a below conscious level.
Yeah.
And if we don't change the model, we don't change the mental models that people have, then we're not going to get any lasting change to that. And I'm an adult educator, and I have come finally back around to Jack Mesereau's transformational change idea from the 80s, which is really about what happens in transformational learning is we change perspectives. And I think that's something as trainers we haven't really understood, that we are moving up the pyramid from strictly knowledge, which helps behavior, but unless we get up into that perspective change, that our mental models, our beliefs, our values, that we don't create long-lasting change. And the other bit that I wanted to bring up is, I think it was Duhigg's book that you reference. I think it was in that he talked about the new CEO for a large industrial company that found a keystone behavior, and he used the word keystone behavior. I think it was Alcan aluminum. I think that was Charles Duhigg's book, but it was brilliant, because what the guy found was and what he did, he went to the board and said, I'm going to change the culture of this company through safety.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's a terrific story. And if you got the book, go back into the book and read about it, because it actually caused a drop in share price when he said that at the board meeting. And it's a fascinating piece, and it worked.
Mhm.
It was a brilliant piece on how to cause that bigger change. But I think in the training world, we're starting to realize that, we got to lift our sights a little bit into that values and beliefs and models and perspectives.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
good, and if you look at really good training, that's the feedback you get. It is you'll get, oh, and you get it, Bradley, you changed how I look at something. Well, that's not knowledge. That's perspective. And that's the magic. And I think Edan, building the ability to do that into myQuest is critical. And that's that's what I'm really geeked up about, is how do we and then how do we chase that success with that person? Because there's a seedling in the organization that can then go create other seedlings. So
Yeah. Bradley, if you'll have any idea on features and anything that you think we can add to the system, to myQuest, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to. As I told you, right now we're building the next generation, so it's the right timing.
yeah. And I've been looking to get more involved and start to work more with it in my business, but I've got some personal stuff that I'm dealing with right now that sort of slowed me down. But I will jump into the conversation with you guys. That I would like to be part of that, because I think you're so on the right track.
Thank you so much. Maybe I know we're running out of time, so maybe Walter, last question, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Yes, thanks. I'm working with Nicole right now, and I have a nonprofit. So the training I'm doing is not to adults, and I've been an adult trainer in software for the last 30 years, but I'm training actually students and changing their mindset on violence and things they do in school. So it's a little bit different, but I would just ask everyone to imagine if you had people you're training that were already, my kids already read the books that you just said, and they're starting early. So their mindset is changing on their habits already. So, when it comes to training, if you already have someone already in that area to learn, it's better. The other thing that I put on there that you talked about, when I create curriculum for software, I used to just create tasks and everyone do everything, but it wasn't engaging. So everything that I created, I made sure it didn't work. I made sure it was a problem. When I did that, they would remember. But when I made it smooth, I come back 6 months and they wouldn't even use the system. They wouldn't even follow. They forget. So, like I said, sometimes pain creates memory.
Mhm.
If it's repetitious, people start to change their habits because it's either painful or they remember the pain and the struggle they did to fix it. And they tend to do that. I'm trying to create the same thing with the kids, especially with habits and repetition, and really building leaders for our future by them affecting, like you said, some of the peer, they're affecting other kids to change too, and not to react, but think and use their minds. So I just wanted to share that. And I'm working with Nicole because I have curriculum, I have training for kids in a leadership club that are in schools, but it needs to be more engaging. And I want to look at it being something that they can, your company can put in where they're starting to do things. Because I have actually things they need to do in order to not just train them, they need to go out and practice it. So it becomes a habit and things. But thanks a lot for today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think that pain sometimes creates that sense of urgency that we talked about.
Absolutely.
People don't like to be in pain.
Yeah, Walter, thank you so much for sharing this. And Heather, it was really great session. Thank you so much. I'm putting here on the chat a link to book a call with us if you want to learn more about myQuest, or if you want to learn more, how maybe we can support you with your behavioral change in your training. So feel free to use it to book call with one of our team members. This was a great session. We'll send everyone an email after this session with the recording and also with some more information if you would like. And we're doing these sessions like usually once a month, sometimes twice a month. So feel free to stay tuned on what we're doing. Our goal is really to support the community and make sure that people can, help other people become, achieve their goals and develop new skills. So thank you very much, everyone. Ethel, thank you again. And we'll see you, everyone, on our next session.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you all. Take care. Bye.